Welcome. Within the last hour, I've negotiated a deal to give the United Kingdom special status inside the European Union. I will fly back to London tonight and update the Cabinet at 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. This deal has delivered on the commitments I made at the beginning of this renegotiation process. Britain will be permanently out of ever closer union, never part of a European superstate. There will be tough new restrictions on access to our welfare system for EU migrants, no more something for nothing. Britain will never join the euro, and we've secured vital protections for our economy and a full say over the rules of the free trade single market while remaining outside the euro. I believe that this is enough for me to recommend that the United Kingdom remain in the European Union, having the best of both worlds. We will be in the parts of Europe that work for us, influencing the decisions that affect us, in the driving seat of the world's biggest market, and with the ability to take action to keep our people safe. And we'll be out of the parts of Europe that don't work for us, out of the open borders, out of the bailouts, out of the euro, and out of those schemes in which Britain wants no part. Let me set out the details of exactly what we've agreed and why. I began this negotiation to address the concerns of the British people, and today all 28 member states have signed up to concrete reforms in each of the 4 areas that I set out. British jobs and British business all depend on being able to trade with Europe on a level playing field. So our first aim in these negotiations was to get new protections for countries like ours, which are in the single market but not in the euro. Let me take you through what we've secured. We have permanently protected the pound and our right to keep it. For the first time, the EU has explicitly acknowledged that it has more than one currency. Responsibility for supervising the financial stability of the UK remains in the hands of the Bank of England, so we continue to keep our taxpayers and our savers safe. We've ensured that British taxpayers will never be made to bail out countries in the Eurozone. We've ensured that the UK's economic interests are protected. We've made sure that the Eurozone cannot act as a bloc to undermine the integrity of the free trade single market. And we've guaranteed that British business will never face any discrimination for being outside the Eurozone. For example, our financial services firms can never be forced to relocate inside the Eurozone if they want to trade in euros, just because they're based in the UK. And not only are these rules set out in a legally binding agreement, we've also agreed that should the UK or another non-euro member state fear that the rules are being broken, they can activate an emergency safeguard unilaterally to ensure that these rules are enforced. Let me be clear, because there has been debate about this. Britain will have the power to pull this lever on our own. Our second aim in these negotiations was to make Europe more competitive, so we create jobs and make British families more financially secure. We've secured a declaration outlining a number of commitments in this area. For the first time, the European Union will now say that competitiveness is, and I quote, an essential objective of the Union. This is important because it goes to the very heart of what Europe should be about. It means Europe will complete the single market in services. This will make it easier for service-based companies like IT firms to trade in Europe. Nowhere will this be more of an opportunity than in the United Kingdom, where thousands of service companies make up 2/3 of our whole economy. It could add up to 2% to our economy each year. That is a real improvement. The European Union will also complete the single market in capital. This will mean UK startups will be able to access more sources of finance for their business, and it will also present new opportunities for the UK financial services industry. Europe will now also complete the single market in energy. This will allow more suppliers into the UK energy market, lowering bills and increasing investment across the continent. That is a real improvement too. In addition, we've secured commitments from Europe to complete trade and investment agreements with the fastest growing and most dynamic economies around the world, including the USA, Japan and China, as well as our Commonwealth allies, India, New Zealand and Australia. These deals could add billions of pounds and thousands of jobs to our economy every year. And because I know that one of the biggest frustrations with Europe, especially for small businesses, is red tape and bureaucracy, We've also got Europe to introduce targets to cut the total burden of EU regulation on business. That means that from now on, the cost of EU red tape will be going down and not up. Our third aim in these negotiations was to reduce the very high level of migration from within the EU by preventing the abuse of free movement and preventing our welfare system from acting as a magnet for people to come to our country. In this respect, we've secured the following. First, new powers against criminals from other countries, including powers to stop them coming to Britain in the first place and powers to deport them if they're already here. Longer re-entry bans for fraudsters and people who collude in sham marriages. An end to the ridiculous situation where EU nationals can avoid British immigration rules when bringing their families from outside the EU. We've also secured a breakthrough agreement for Britain to reduce the unnatural draw that our benefit system exerts across Europe. We've already made sure that EU migrants cannot claim the new unemployment benefit, universal credit, while looking for work. And those coming from the EU who haven't found work within 6 months can now be required to leave. Today we've established a new emergency brake so that EU migrants will have to wait 4 years until they have full access to our benefits. This finally puts an end to the idea that people can come to our country and get something for nothing. The European Commission has said unambiguously that Britain already qualifies to use this mechanism. And it won't be some short-term fix. Once activated, this brake will be in place for a full 7 years. We've also agreed that EU migrants working in Britain can no longer send child benefit home at UK rates. These changes will apply first to new claimants, and after intense negotiations, we've ensured that they will apply to existing claimants from the start of 2020. I came here to end the practice of sending child benefit overseas at UK rates, both for current and for future claimants, and I've got them both. Our fourth aim in these negotiations was to protect our country from further European political integration and increase powers for our national parliament. Ever since we joined, Europe has been on the path to something called ever closer union. It means a political union. We've never liked it, we've never wanted it. And today we've permanently carved Britain out of it, so we can never be forced into political integration with the rest of Europe. The text of the legally binding agreement today sets out in full the UK's position. It says that the treaties will be changed to make clear, and I quote, "The treaty references to ever closer union do not apply to the United Kingdom." Let me put this as simply as I can. Britain will never be part of a European superstate. We've also put power back in the hands of Westminster and other national parliaments. A new red card will mean the UK Parliament can work with others to block unwanted legislation from Brussels. And at long last, we have an agreement that wherever possible, powers should be returned to member states. And we have a new mechanism to make this a reality. Every year, the EU now has to go through the powers they exercise and work out which are no longer needed and should be returned to nation states. In recent years, we've also seen attempts to bypass our opt-out on justice and home affairs by bringing forward legislation under a different label. For example, attempts to interfere with the way the UK authorities handle fraud, but brought under the guise of legislation under the EU budget. With today's new agreement, we've made sure this can never happen again. Likewise, we've established once and for all in international law that Britain's national security is the sole responsibility of the British government. So, for instance, we can never be part of a European army. These are significant reforms, but I've always said that if we needed to go further to put Britain's sovereignty beyond doubt, then we would. So, in addition to these changes, I will shortly be bringing forward further proposals that we can take as a country, unilaterally, to strengthen the sovereignty of Britain's great institutions. The reforms that we've secured today have been agreed by all 28 leaders, and I thank them for their patience, for their goodwill, for their assistance, for all the work that we've done, not just in the last 48 hours, but in all the months since the election last year. The changes that we've agreed will be legally binding in international law and will be deposited at the United Nations. They cannot be unpicked without the unanimous agreement of every EU country, and that includes Britain. So when I said I wanted reforms that are legally binding and irreversible, that is what I've got. And the Council was also clear that the treaties will be changed in two important respects. First, to incorporate the new principles for managing the relationship between countries inside and outside the Eurozone, and second, to carve the UK out of ever closer union. I believe the changes that we've secured as a country fulfil the objectives I set out in our manifesto at the last election. And I think they do create a more flexible Europe, more of a live and let live arrangement that recognises that one size does not fit all. But of course there's still more to do, and I'm the first to say that there are still many ways in which this organisation needs to improve. The task of reforming Europe does not end with today's agreement. Far from it. This is a milestone on a journey, not the end point. And let's be clear, there's absolutely nothing in this agreement that stops further reform taking place. For as long as we stay in the European Union, Britain will be in there, driving forward the single market, bearing down on regulation, championing the cause of free trade, and helping to ensure that Europe remains open to the world and robust, for instance, in the face of Russian aggression. But with this new agreement, I believe the time has come for me to fulfil the promise I made when I stood for a second term as Prime Minister. So tomorrow I will present this agreement to Cabinet, and on Monday I will make a statement to Parliament and commence the process set out under our EU Referendum Act to hold a referendum on Britain's membership of the European Union. The British people must now decide whether to stay in this reformed European Union or to leave. This will be a once-in-a-generation moment to shape the destiny of our country. Now, there will be many passionate arguments made over the months ahead, and this will not be a debate along party political lines. There will be people in my party and in other parties arguing on both sides of the debate. And that is entirely right. This is an historic moment for Britain, and people must be free to reach their own conclusion. And in the end, this will not be a decision for politicians. It will be a decision for the British people. And we'll need to look at all the facts and to ask searching questions of what either choice would really mean. Simply being in Europe doesn't solve our economic problems, far from it. And I've always been clear about that, just as I've always opposed Britain joining the euro. But turning our back on the EU is no solution at all. And we should be suspicious of those who claim that leaving Europe is some automatic fast track to a land of milk and honey. We all need to step back and consider carefully what is best for Britain, what is best for our future. Whatever the British public decide, I will make work to the best of my abilities. But let me tell you what I believe. I do not love Brussels, I love Britain. And my job, the job of the British Prime Minister, is doing all in my power to protect Britain's interests. So when it comes to Europe, mine is a hard-headed assessment of what is in our national interest. We should never forget why this organisation came into being. 70 years ago, our countries were fighting each other. Today, we are talking. Today, we are trying to fix problems. Today, we discuss round a table how we're going to sort things out. And we should never forget that. We should never take that cardinal achievement, peace and stability on the continent, for granted. Today, our world is again an uncertain place, with threats to our security and our existence coming from multiple quarters. This, in my view, is a time to stick together, a time for strength in numbers. Like many, I've had my doubts about the European Union as an organisation. Believe me, I still do. But just because an organisation is frustrating, it does not mean you should necessarily walk out of it, and certainly not without thinking very carefully about the consequences. The question that matters for me as Prime Minister is what is best for my country. How as a country are we stronger, safer, better off? This is something I've given a huge amount of thought. And now we have this agreement. I do believe that the answers lie inside a reformed European Union. And let me explain why. First, Britain will be stronger remaining in a reformed Europe than we would be out on our own, because we can play a leading role in one of the world's largest organisations from within, helping us determine our future. Yes, there are frustrations, and no, we don't always get our way. But time and again, British leadership at the top table gets things done, whether it's imposing sanctions on Russia or Iran, or tackling people smuggling in the Mediterranean. Because the truth is this: throughout our history, our strength as a nation has come from looking beyond our shores and reaching out to the world. And today the EU, like NATO, like the UN, is a vital tool for Britain that we can use to boost our nation's power in the world and multiply our ability to advance Britain's interests, to protect our people, to sell our goods, to generate jobs, to raise our people's standard of living. That is one of the reasons why our closest friends outside Europe, from Australia to New Zealand, the United States and Canada, they all want us to stay inside the EU, and we should listen to them. People who want us to leave would take us out of this position of influence, and they can't tell you what that would mean for Britain's ability to advance our interests. Second, I profoundly believe the British people will be safer remaining in a reformed Europe than we would be out on our own. Let me tell you why. We will always depend on NATO as the bedrock of our nation's defence. But today we face a myriad of threats to our security, from terrorism to organised crime, from human trafficking to cyber attacks. We defeat these threats by working together, by the closest possible cooperation between countries, especially with our closest neighbours in Europe. Let me give you one example from the way we share information. When terrorists tried to bomb London for the second time in 2005, one of the culprits fled to mainland Europe. Because of the European arrest warrant, we could bring him back in just a few weeks. Previously, that could have taken years. So when I say we are safer, I really mean it. By contrast, those who want to leave can't tell you whether and how this cooperation would continue, or how long it would take to attempt to replicate these arrangements with each European country one by one. Third, Britain would be better off remaining in a reformed Europe than we would be out on our own, because British businesses will have full access to the free trade single market of 500 million people. This brings jobs, it brings investment, it brings lower prices, and it brings financial security to our country. Those who want to leave can't tell you if we should still have access to this free trade single market or on what terms. They can't tell you how long it would take to get a new agreement with 27 countries. That could mean years of uncertainty for our economy and for our children's future. And let's be clear, if we were to leave, it's not in Europe's interest to give us all the benefits of membership without any of the responsibilities. Look at Norway or Switzerland. Neither have as much access to the single market, and neither have any say over its rules, and yet they both still have to pay into the EU budget, and they both have to accept migration from within the EU. Of course, as I've said, the EU is not perfect. There is a need for further and continuing reform, but the UK is best placed to do that from the inside. Our plan for Europe gives us the best of both worlds. It underlines our special status through which we will be in the parts of Europe that work for us, keeping full access to that single market, which makes us better off, and the Europe-wide cooperation on crime and terrorism that makes us more secure, but we'll be out of the parts of Europe that don't work for us. We'll never join the euro, we'll never be part of Eurozone bailouts, never part of the passport-free area, a European army, or a European superstate. As I've said, I'm not saying that Britain couldn't survive outside Europe, but after nearly 6 long years of difficult decisions and hard work by the British people, our economy has turned a corner. In an uncertain world, is this really the time to add a huge new risk to our national and our economic security? I don't believe that is right for Britain. I believe we are stronger, safer, and better off inside a reformed European Union. And that is why I'll be campaigning with all my heart and soul to persuade the British people to remain in the reformed European Union that we have secured today. Thank you very much, and happy to take some questions. Let's start with Nick Watt.
Nick Watt from The Guardian. Prime Minister, your party for the last quarter of a century has been engaged in what some people have described as a lengthy drive-by shooting on the European Union. How do you expect to be taken seriously by the British people as you embark on this handbrake turn and now make an argument that our destiny lies in Europe when so many of the things that caused you to be a Eurosceptic are still there? We still have the primacy of EU law, we still have the Charter of Fundamental Rights, the European Commission still has the sole power of initiation. And also, if I may ask you, it appears that your good friend Michael Gove has decided that he agrees with Nigel Farage and George Galloway and he doesn't agree with Dave. Are you disappointed? disappointed?
Well, first of all, on your first question, I've been arguing for reform of the European Union and arguing for reform of Britain's place in it for 20, 25 years. And it is a privilege to be Prime Minister of this country and be able to bring so many of those reforms about. And I think it is worth remembering, when we set off down this track, and I said we would renegotiate our membership from a standing start, people said, you'll never hold that renegotiation, you'll never hold that referendum, you'll never get people to agree to the things you want. And look at what we've agreed today. I won't overstate what we've agreed, but I said I would get Britain out of ever closer union. That's exactly what this agreement does. I said I'd get fairness for the pound, because if we're going to work inside this European Union, which has, of course, its own important currency, the euro, we must have fairness, we must have non-discrimination, we must have proper rules to make sure we don't just keep the pound, but we keep the pound and our currencies treated fairly. And this is really an important set of principles set out today that will become part of the treaties of the European Union. I said Europe's got to focus more on competitiveness, less bureaucracy, get out there, sell to the world, sign these trade deals, all of those things in this agreement today. And then when I talked about the importance of enhancing our control of migration, addressing this challenge of welfare, people said to me, you will never get other European countries to allow Britain not to pay instant welfare benefits to people who come. Well, that is exactly what this agreement does today. You will not get full access to our welfare system for 4 years. Now, just think for a second what this actually means today. Right? We are going to have this emergency break. It's going to last for 7 years. And when people come to Britain, they won't be able to get full access to our welfare system for 4 years. Now, let's say this break comes into place in 2017. That means it's still going to be operating in 2024. That means someone coming in 2024 will not have full access to our welfare system in 2028. Now, I think when we set out on this negotiation, people would not have believed that was possible to achieve, but that is exactly what this agreement today brings about. No more something for nothing. People can come to our country, but they will not get out of our welfare system until they've paid in. And I think that's a very profound change. Now, let me say about Michael Gove. Michael is one of my oldest and closest friends. He has wanted to get Britain to pull out of the European Union for about 30 years. So, of course, I'm disappointed that we're not going to be on the same side as we have this vital argument about our country's future. I'm disappointed, but I'm not surprised. And people will have to decide. Politicians are only going to get one vote, just like everyone else is going to get one vote. And all I can say in the position I have, I profoundly believe that with these changes, with everything that's happening in our world, everything that's happening in our economy, we'll be better off inside this reformed European Union. And I'll put this agreement to the Cabinet. I hope the Cabinet will back this agreement. Then we'll hold that referendum, and I will campaign very, very strongly with all the insight I hope I have, as having led our country for almost 6 years, that we're better off inside a reformed European Union. Other politicians will have to make up their minds, and they will have to make their own announcements. But in the end, it's the British people who will decide. Let's have Faisal from Sky.
Prime Minister, you promised, as you'll well remember, fundamental and far-reaching change at your Bloomberg speech. Can you even begin to say that you can guarantee that there'll be a single less EU migrant from the record 330,000 net migration that we have at the moment? Can you guarantee that a single less EU law will apply to the United Kingdom? You went for a 13-year emergency break and you got a 7-year emergency break. Did you really fold on this negotiation? And lastly, what are you doing on June the 23rd?
First of all, I think any impartial examination of what was promised in this negotiation and what has been delivered would conclude that we have delivered the overwhelming majority of all the things that we said we would. For instance, getting Britain out of ever closer union, not just words, but a commitment to a treaty change that says that ever closer union no longer applies to the United Kingdom. That's incredibly strong. The changes on welfare. We said no full access for 4 years. We've got no full access for 4 years, and because it's a 7-year break, as I've said, this could still be operating in 2028. I don't know where we're all going to be in 2028, but that is, I think, on anyone's reckoning, a very, very long time away in terms of a fundamental change to the way this organisation works. I'm not claiming I've solved all of Europe's problems. I'm not claiming I've solved all of Britain's problems with Europe. But what I am claiming is the things we set out we'd do, the problems that British people feel we face with Europe, we have gone a long way to addressing those. I'd say when you ask people, what is it that concerns you about the way Europe works? People say it is too much of a political union. Well, we're out of that political union. They say it's too much of a single currency club. We've guaranteed fair treatment for the pound and never having to not only not just join the euro, but bail out the euro. People say it's not competitive enough. There's too much bureaucracy. Our declaration clearly addresses that, with also a target to reduce bureaucracy. And people are frustrated by the sense that we don't have enough control over our borders or over our welfare. And actually this agreement addresses both of those things. First, because of the welfare changes, which I think on any fair looking at this are really significant. And secondly, the very important changes on the abuse of free movement. It has been a frustration of British Home Secretaries and British governments for years that we can't apply our immigration rules to third country nationals coming from Europe. Now we can. It's been a frustration for years. We can't address sham marriages, including the huge amount taking place in countries very close to the UK with people coming in. We now can. So, yes, I can tell you that there will be people who currently are coming who won't be able to come because of these rule changes. But as I say, it doesn't solve all the problems, but I think any dispassionate, impartial examination of what was promised and what was been delivered would say we have actually delivered the things that we said we would in this negotiation. I'm looking for the BBC. I feel, oh my God, right, okay, sorry, BBC.
Prime Minister, firstly, does this now pave a way for a referendum in June? Is that what you want, and is that what you'll announce? And secondly, how do you think this will change or influence the decision of the voters in the UK? Do you really think what you've managed to negotiate here will make any difference at all?
On the referendum, we'll be making an announcement about that shortly. I think it's right to go and meet with the Cabinet tomorrow to discuss this package, to seek the Cabinet's endorsement for the changes that have been agreed here by 27 other heads of state and government, and then to set a referendum date so this question is put to the British people with plenty of time for people to look at all the arguments and to make up their mind. Look, as people go into this referendum, of course they will be asking very big questions about the future of our country. I think chiefly the questions are, how will we be better off, in or out? How will we be safer, in or out? How will Britain be able to influence events in the world to protect our interests at home? Those, I think, are the three key questions. Now, I'm not saying that, you know, the renegotiation is the answer to those three questions. Of course it isn't. Those three questions are very profound about Britain's future place in the world. But I think there are many people, me included, who for years have been frustrated by the way that Europe works and the way that Britain's relationship in Europe works. And these changes are designed to help fix some of those frustrations. So it is frustrating for business that there's too much bureaucracy. This helps to address that. It is frustrating that there's not real fairness between those countries in the euro and those out. This really does go a long way to fixing that systemically important question for our country for the future. People are frustrated, I'm frustrated, by the fact we haven't been able to control the draw of welfare to people in our country. We now can do that. So I think it is, these are significant changes. They address people's concerns about Europe, and I think they now give us a good basis to go forward and say, now some of these concerns have been addressed, let's now ask the really big question about Britain's place in the world, how we're safer, how we're stronger, how we're better off. Is it inside this reformed European Union, or is it by stepping outside? And I profoundly believe that would be a leap in the dark. That would be a dangerous thing to do at a time of uncertainty. And I'll be making those arguments right around the country. But in the end, the British people will decide. My job as Prime Minister will be to deliver their decision. And as I said tonight, I will do that to the best of my ability. But I will take a huge amount of time and effort to make the arguments in the coming weeks and months, because this is such an important question. It really is a huge question, one of the biggest that our generation has had to face. Let's have the Times.
Prime Minister, what's your answer to those who would say that the best way of getting a better deal from Brussels would be to vote no in the referendum? Would you see that Article 50 would be triggered in the event of a no vote?
Well, I think the answer to people who think if you vote no, you get a better deal, it's first of all, there's rather a staggering lack of confidence in a no vote. If you want to leave the European Union, then you should vote to leave the European Union. And actually, as the agreement says today, that if Britain votes to leave the European Union, this deal, all these agreements that we painstakingly negotiated, they disappear. So in fact, if you vote to leave, you get to leave. And there's only one way to leave, and that is the way that you suggest. So I think we can knock that on the head very quickly. If you want to stay in the EU with the prospect of more reform, because reform doesn't end today, then you vote to remain. If you want to leave the EU, you vote to leave the EU, and you leave. I think this is my 47th European Council. I've spent a lot of time with other prime ministers and presidents. They've been extraordinarily patient. They've shown great goodwill. We spent basically 2 days discussing one country, Britain. And I'm very grateful for all the agreements that we've come to. And I think the idea that a vote to leave the EU would lead to a whole new renegotiation, I think, frankly, is for the birds. And I think people who want to leave should have the confidence to vote to leave, not to vote for something else. George.
Prime Minister, you talked about the fact you'd be unveiling in the next few days your proposals for some kind of British Sovereignty Act. Won't this just be a matter of constitutional window dressing? Will it have any real effects? And are you hopeful it will persuade your other good friend, Boris Johnson, to campaign alongside you in the campaign?
I'm confident, as I've said before, that it's important we put beyond doubt that the British Parliament is sovereign, that Britain chooses the acts it takes through its parliamentary sovereignty. And I think that's very important, and you'll have to wait and see the proposals that we come up with. As for others, look, everyone will have to make up their own mind. In the end, the Cabinet will meet, the Cabinet will discuss this. I'm confident that we will agree that this is the right approach for Britain, this is a good agreement. And then the campaign will begin, and there'll be politicians on both sides. There'll be politicians from probably all parties on both sides, although I suspect UKIP probably won't have many on my side of the argument. But there'll be politicians of all sorts on all different sides. But in the end, this actually isn't the politician's show. It is the people's show. It is going to be their decision. And I hope that what we can do in the next few months is encourage an enormous debate and discussion right across the country about what this means for Britain, and try to make sure that people feel free to speak out, from businesses, large and small, from charities and organisations, people who've got experience of any aspects of the issues that we're talking about, because this is going to be one of the biggest decisions our country takes, in the last 40 years or in the next 40 years. And so I want to encourage that debate, and I'm sure politicians on all sides will play a big part in leading that debate and encouraging that debate. But in the end, this is a question for the people, not for the politicians. Absolutely, yes. Daily Mail.
Prime Minister, what do you say to people who approach the next 4 months with a sense of dread of listening to the arguments between you and Nigel Farage, people who just really don't care about this issue at all, and how do you persuade them to go out and vote on June the 23rd?
Well, I think, first of all, I'm a huge respecter of the British electorate. I think if you put an important question in front of people, they really engage with it and really want to come up with the right answer. I think Britain's future in Europe is one of those questions. Now, if all we talk about is European Council conclusions and complicated documents to do with single market integration and all the rest of it, I think we will bore people to death. But if actually we ask some big, profound questions about jobs and prosperity, how do we prosper as a nation inside this biggest market in the world with a say over its rules, or outside trying to work out how to get back in? How are we safer? Are we safer when we know terrorists and criminals cross borders and we've got the access to all the information systems to try and help keep people safe? Or are we safer if we leave that and try and work out again how would we re-engage in some of those arrangements? How do we get things done in the world that we believe are important for the world but also important for our safety? How do we help make sure we raise the biggest amount of money for Syrian refugees? How do we get the biggest impact at a climate change conference in Paris? How do we help countries in North Africa who might threaten our security if they fall apart? How do we best help them? Now, of course, Britain does a lot of these things on our own, or through the UN, or with the Americans, with NATO partners, but we also do it through the EU, because we're working and talking with our partners in this organisation, countries that are very close neighbours and friends, about these issues. We maximise our influence. In the end, I think people do think that's important. There are an awful lot of, very down-to-earth questions about how do we make sure we keep cheap airfares? How do we make sure that when we use our mobile phones on holiday, it doesn't cost the earth? Wouldn't it be nice if we could load up our iPads with digital content and be able to access in different European countries? There's some very bread-and-butter issues that people will be interested in too, but I think the profound questions about how are we stronger, how are we safer, how are we better off, I think those are big questions, and I think people know they're big questions. What I've always seen in British politics is whenever there's a big question that comes along, people get very engaged, very interested, because they know it matters, and this one really matters. Rob.
Rob Hutton from Bloomberg. Prime Minister, when we all go and talk to people around the country about what annoys them about the EU, what an awful lot of them say is immigration. And with all due respect, most of the migrants who come to the UK from Eastern Europe aren't coming on sham marriages, and they're not coming to claim welfare, they're coming to work. Now, nothing that you've set out today is going to do anything about that. Are you going to level with people and say, actually, I can't cut immigration from Europe, and to be honest, I don't even really want to, because it's good for the economy?
We've been very clear. We've said, look, we accept free movement under the rules of the EU. Many British people take advantage of that free movement to live and work in other European countries, just as Europeans come and live and work in Britain. And we accept that, and we think people have benefited from that. But what we have been trying to change, and what this enables us to change, is some very important aspects of how welfare and migration act together. And if you go back to the election time, I said 4 things. I said, first of all, people coming from Europe to look for work in Britain, they shouldn't be able to claim unemployment benefit. And with the arrival of universal credit, we will meet that pledge. They won't be able to claim unemployment benefit. The second thing we said was after 6 months, if they haven't found a job, they should have to return to the country they came from. And again, we are on our way to achieving that with the rules about not being able to sustain yourself, and we are now making people return. The third thing we said was that if you come, you shouldn't have access to our welfare system for 4 years. Now, what we've achieved is that you do not get full access to our welfare system for 4 years. And as I've said, under this agreement today, this break is going to last for 7 years. So from, say, 2017 to 2024. So we're still going to be talking about this welfare break in 2028. The fourth thing I said was that we shouldn't be paying out child benefit to people who come and work but leave their children at home. And what we achieved with this agreement today is that child benefit will only be paid at a rate discounted for the cost of living in those countries. And again, that's going to apply both to people who are already in the UK and people who come to the UK. So I think those are the commitments we made. Those are the achievements that we have delivered. And I would just say this, that given that today you can come to Britain and take a job and instantly get as much as £10,000 a year in tax credits, don't tell me that isn't an artificial draw. Indeed, actually, it's so much of a draw that, some people who train in other countries, perhaps to be a nurse or work a skilled job, are actually better off coming to Britain to do unskilled work. Now, that's not necessarily in the country they're leaving's interest, or necessarily in our interest, where we should be training up people to do those jobs. And that's why there are so many EU graduates in Britain working in unskilled jobs. So I think there is a big connection between welfare and migration, and that's why these changes are important, and that's why I think they'll have the overwhelming backing of the British people. One of the things people said throughout the election campaign is that we've got to get rid of the idea of something for nothing. People actually respect the fact that people come to Britain and want to work and make a contribution, and we see that in so many places and so many walks of life. But what you shouldn't have is instant access to the in-work welfare system. You should pay something in before you get something out. I think that's a very sound principle to work on, one backed by the overwhelming amount of British people, something we were absolutely told we wouldn't achieve, and something that today we have achieved. Final question. Who's been really patient? Let's have over here.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Enrique Cerveto from the Spanish newspaper ABC. I would like to put a simple question for you. Are you ready to accept the British citizens to be indiscriminated in other European countries in welfare services in other countries?
Well, I'm ready to see other countries access the rules that we have now clearly set out. We've said that we think it's right that if a country has huge pressures, it should be able to pull this welfare break. The European Commission have said we qualify for that, and so we're able, for the next 7 years, to operate that mechanism. Now, I don't see this as discrimination in any way, shape or form. Britain is quite unique in that we have a in-work welfare system that you can get out of as soon as you start working. And so it does generate this problem that people who come to Britain and work hard, they do have instant access to a welfare system before they paid into the system. And that's why I think British people will strongly back this new principle that, yes, you can come to Britain and work, but you don't get out of the in-work welfare system until you've paid in to our tax system. I think that's very fair, and I think fairness is at the heart of this deal. Fairness for Britain, fairness for the pound, fairness for our welfare system, and I think that's why, and as I say, I'm not overstating this, we've not solved all of Britain's problems with Europe, all of Europe's problems, but this is a very solid piece of work. It's in line absolutely with what we promised. It addresses so many people's concerns with Britain's place in Europe, and I think it gives us the right platform to go on to fight a referendum and to make sure that Britain stays stronger, safer and more prosperous inside a reformed European Union. Thank you very much.